We got plenty of choices when it comes to holding a lane, even if we exclude all the 6 stars. We had Estelle, Pluma, Spectre, and whatnot. And then the goat showed up. Now, to get things out of the way, she is not a boss killer. You will not see a showcase of Hadiya just deleting all the bosses because, let's be honest for a second, she is pretty bad at it. If you actually want to kill bosses, pick a Grace Bearer. She actually has all the skilling required to eliminate those in the first place. The reason for this is because Hadiya buffs her own attack by an absolute ton. The issue with that is that if you decide to bring Warfarin or Stainless to buff her attack, it will result in a lot of dilution to her actual attack, compared to Gracebearer who has only attack scale on both of her abilities. Meaning that if you increase Gracebearer's attack by 90%, you're getting about a 90% damage increase in return against a 0 defense target. This is also part of the reason why she's been compared to Centurions and not Gracebearer herself or any kind of dedicated boss killer. They both share a lot of similar features. She can hit up to 3 targets, just like the Centurions. She doesn't scale very well with buffs that increase her attack. And she shares some survivability tools to help her hold a lane. Before we go over the comparison with the other Centurions, let's have a look at how her kit functions. She can spend DP to strengthen combat abilities, and whenever she spends DP, she'll get a small attack buff that stacks up to 5 times, and a very important feature of her kit, she will be able to stun all enemies within range for 2 seconds. This is critical to her actually functioning. If I actually drop her, I can stun enemies right after deployment, and if I activate the skill right now, you can see that the wolves get briefly stunned. This icon represents a skill that can be enhanced. If I activate it, it's going to activate a trait again, stun the wolf, and extend the duration by 15 seconds. Activating the skill 2, in this case, is going to consume 10 DP, and another 15 DP for enhancing the skill. For the sake of this video, the comparison will be mainly made between Hadiya, Spectre, and Estelle, starting with just the stats. The defensive stat line is pretty similar. The max HP of both Hadiya and Centurions are similar. If we take a look at the defense, during skill 1 she gets double the defense, but you can see that the base defense by itself is slightly higher at almost 400, with Spectre's at 350 and Estelle having even less than 350. Uniquely, she gets an additional 10 res. For some reason, HG decided that the more recent archetypes of gods should have 10 extra res. Sure, why not? DP cost is massively down, but this is to compensate for the fact that any skill activation or modification is going to cost you dearly. It's more a case of being allowed to deploy your god early on in case there is an enemy rush, and having a stronger body than that of usual vanguards, at least in theory. The attack interval is pretty similar, being slightly higher than that of Centurions, but while it shows 125, due to how the game calculates, it's actually slightly more due to frame rounding. The main difference here is base attack. Hadiya has not even 600 attack here. Now, we are considering that there are no modules, no potentials, which is not necessarily a realistic situation, and we don't even count for the various buffs. As such, because there are just too many multiplayers to take into account, this is why I made the spreadsheet in the first place. Now, realistically, your 4 stars are going to have a much higher potential, so I could just give Estelle like potential 5. Which means she's going to unlock potentials, it gives her a bit of additional HP, meaning she is winning, even if by just a little bit. Hadiya has a potential, at potential 4, she gets some additional attack. The main issue I have with this is that you get her from the red shop. You need to spend red certificates. Beyond the initial purchase, any upgrade of her potential means you're going to have to spend an additional 600 red certificates. Taking a look at how many potentials you need to go through, you realize that if you actually want to get the initial base attack, you're gonna have to spend a whopping 2,400 red certificates. Because our base attack is so low, any improvement then suddenly becomes critical. Reminder, she really doesn't benefit all that much from buffs to her attack coming from her skills because her base attack is so low, the buffs are not functioning as well. The saving grace here for skill 2 is just that it comes with a 150% attack multiplier, which is definitely above average, but it does come with its own quirks. And this is going to be the recurring theme when we talk about Hadiya, is that technically her performance is not that bad. Now, there is one thing that we did not take into account, which is specifically that whenever she spends DP, she's going to gain a little bit of an attack buff. At the very least, you're gonna have to spend DP at least once when you deploy her, and then if you activate her skill and enhance it, that's gonna be 2 more times. So her attack is actually going to be slightly higher. If you leave her on the field for quite some time, she is going to get to respectable almost 1700 attack, pretty close to what Estelle is bringing. All these comparisons are done without any module just yet. The issue is that currently Spectre has a module available to her, and it's a pretty good one if you decide to upgrade it to X3. She gets a multiplier where every time she attacks an enemy, her general damage is going to be increased to 110%. The issue with this is that you can see when making the comparison that Spectre is going to hit a lot harder during her skill 2 compared to Hadiya's own skill 2. But even if Spectre is using skill 1 because you don't want her to get stunned, there are some situations in which skill 1 is actually the valid answer on Spectre, you can see that the difference in damage is quite significantly in favor of Spectre. The main reason why I have Spectre as a point of comparison is also because everyone gets an opportunity to get Spectre when they join the game, at least within 1 week of joining. So having an operator that is freely available is going to have significantly higher stat by default, as well as some additional bonuses like being able to regen her HP, on top of having higher attack. It's just a pretty bad start for Hadiya, but let's see if we can at least make the comparison between Estelle. After all, players may consider picking Lapland instead of Spectre, and instead having Hadiya for holding lanes. That is why Estelle is here. But even in that situation, if we make the comparison between Hadiya and Estelle, you can see that Estelle is still going to have a similar attack on her skill 2 compared to Hadiya, if not higher. And keep in mind, this is without module. Ultimately, Hadiya will get a module in the future and things might change. So I figured, what if we actually craft a module for Hadiya? How would she compare then? On the screen, you can see the module that I came up with. The first part is that you can actually strengthen her abilities twice per skill activation. For example, on skill 2, that would mean that you can activate the skill again, get an additional stun, get an additional stack to increase her attack, and increase the duration even further. On skill 1, it increases her attack by 100%, so second activation would actually increase it to 200%. If that sounds strong, it really isn't. You have to keep in mind that, by comparison, a base attack is still very low, and skill 1 only allows her to hit a single target. The second point is pretty much in line with what we get from most modules for 5 stars. Some very minor attack buffs. That is to say, level 2 and 3 are pretty realistic in terms of what you should be expecting from a module, which is to say, probably not a big damage increase. As for the attribute stats, the attack and the defense that you get at every level, these are simply copy-pasted from Spectre's own module. If we actually go there, this is the fake mode. Again, she does not have a mod yet, not even on CN, this is just for the sake of comparison. Even using this mode, and supposing that we get to the additional 6 stacks of the buffs available, her attack is still superior to that of Estelle, but still does not compare to Spectre, for example. And that's kind of the crux of the issue, is she is just so far behind when it comes to attack that it's really hard to justify her use case. The archetype does have the issue that you're meant to spend DP to get a really strong payoff. But the strong payoff is not really there. The only two unique aspects that she has by comparison is the 2 extra range during skill 2 as well as the ability to stun. But the stun uptime is still not great. This is only 2 seconds. If she had her module, one way Hyperglyph could change her kit a little bit is by simply increasing the stun duration by just a little bit. Even if it's up to 2.5 or 3 seconds, it's not a particularly massive increase, but it will still be noticeable. Now, one last point of comparison between Hadiya and Estelle. If we are to suppose that Estelle is fully maxed out, as well as Hadiya, and that we are using the currently non-existing mod, you can see that the attack is still very similar between Hadiya and Estelle. The only issue is that Estelle herself is a 4-star and thus a significantly lower investment cost, which is a lot more accessible to newer players. You have to consider that Hadiya only gets to hit 3 targets during skill 2. And don't get me wrong, the uptime is actually great considering that she can extend the duration and that the skill has a fairly standard skill cycle by default. But her off-skill performance is absolutely miserable. She has very low base attack, barely enough to kill even basic enemies. She has no self-sustain option, she can only attack 1 target, and she has only 2 block instead of 3 for Centurions. But in case the comparison between 2 5-stars with a multi-target that could possibly fill the same role is not enough to make you depressed, don't worry, I can make it even worse. Because obviously there is a small problem. And that is, she's an Abyssal Hunter, meaning if you actually want her to scale into the late game by bringing Gladia, Openers, and all the Abyssal Hunters, or like even just Gladia herself to give her insane survivability, you can. And she's going to be able to reach some heights that Hadiya could not possibly hope to actually reach in the first place, simply due to the sheer raw stats. With all that being said, the picture is looking pretty grim. However, as mentioned before, it's all a question of making use out of the 2 things that Hadiya can pull off that allows her to distinguish herself from the other Centurions. The extra range from her skill 2 allows her to cover multiple lanes. The other aspect is just how the stun is a pretty strong survivability tool that can, in some circumstances, just buy you a little bit of time or cancel a particularly dangerous attack that allows her to survive in circumstances where some others will simply die. The other aspect is that this range does allow her to be placed in the back line. I have found a particularly interesting synergy with Blitzcalm. Hadiya's off-skills performance is really mediocre, but Blitzcalm offsets that issue by providing additional XP support. This is not an invincible duo by any means, but this is one that can still deal with pretty dangerous encounters and still get away with it in most circumstances. It will take a lot of pressure to actually break through the both of them. Still, even considering situations in which Spectre does not have all the buffs from the Abyssal Hunters, and situations in which Hadiya cannot necessarily make full use out of her extra range, in case you have a lot of healing from your medics or guardians, the self-sustain that both Estelle and Spectre have become less relevant. And as a result, in terms of combat performance, taking a look just at the ability to clear the incoming enemies, Hadiya can absolutely hold her own. While her off-skill performance is pretty mediocre, she does have the benefit of having a high uptime, and having some operators to also cover for the downtime, as is the case with Shamari, who can reduce the attack of enemies and ensure the survivability of all operators involved. Even some very threatening enemies can be handled by all of them. All of them, but not quite. In the footage, Estelle is actually going to fail, but Hadiya and Spectre both actually managed to handle their own through different means. Spectre by using her skill 2 to provide her immortality, in case there is neither Shamare nor Telopsis who have their abilities ready to help keep her alive when the onslaught is at its strongest. Hadiya through the careful use of her skill to actually time stun and interrupt the enemies within range to buy some precious time until Shamari or Telopsis both get their skills back. In practice, Hadiya ends up being a pretty similar lane holder when it comes to killing speed. Spectre ends up having better performance on skill, but her skill 2 just doesn't last all that long, and then she's quickly back to her off-skill performance. Yes, Hadiya might lose in terms of off-skill performance, and by a very wide margin. Her strength lies in reducing her downtime as much as possible to ensure that she can actually clear the threats when it actually matters. Back to Estelle, you can still notice that she can handle most of the enemies. She has to be using skill 1 in those circumstances because the skill 2 prevents any and all healing from actually targeting her, apart from their own talent, but that is not sufficient to keep her alive. In those kind of circumstances, where you expect the operator to be under a lot of pressure, Estelle suffers from having to rely on her weaker skill. An issue that Hadiya, notably, will never have. There are no circumstances in which Hadiya will be forced to use her skill 1. Spectre has the same issue, where you might end up having to use her skill 1 even though it has less overall damage, simply because you cannot afford to drop her guard and block count at any point. If she gets stunned, she could just lick an enemy. It's not going to happen in all circumstances, but it's still a notable strength that Hadiya has over the other picks. All these topics being covered, it is pretty difficult to suggest to anyone to actually go ahead and purchase Hadiya. The issue is that as a newer player, you'll have a very limited number of red certificates that you can farm in the first place, and the role that Hadiya fills is rather replaceable. Secondly, her performance is again pretty comparable to Spectre, who is someone that most people can get. Even if you are willing to spend less resources, Estelle can also fill a very similar job. Hadiya's stuns are valuable, but it is difficult to justify it considering the kind of investment that is required in the first place. More veteran players also have little reason to actually pick her in the first place, again evaluating solely her combat performance and nothing else, because for most people, the red certificates are going to be reserved to buy maybe Oniberry due to the difficulty of getting some good wandering medics out there, or even if you're looking for an AoE crowd control option with a lot of bind, since we already have quite a few ambushers that instead focus on other things. Simply put, it appears that your red certificates are better spent elsewhere. Not because Hadiya is a bad operator, but simply because her investment cost is significantly higher than that of existing options that are more freely available to players. However, this overlooks one last detail and a major reason why this video happened in the first place. Her artwork is absolutely peak. Also, she's actually pretty fun to play around. And while I know that this is 2026 and that having fun while playing video games is basically illegal, combat performance is not the sole criteria by which people will pick operators. The reason why I built her in the first place was because of her art style. And it is also a good reminder that the vast majority of people will never play any kind of content that will justify bringing operators that are completely over the top. Most people stick to the main story, side events, and integrated strategies at very low ascension, all of which are situations in which you can, in fact, make Hadiya work. On a final note, she isn't a new player friendly, both by her investment cost but also by the fact that she takes quite a bit of getting used to. Timing her stunts is difficult, but this is part of why playing with her is actually enjoyable. It requires timing, skill, and it does feel rewarding when you actually manage to pull it off. If you are worried about spending your resources unwisely, then just grab one of the many world-destroying ops out there. There is one coming right up. And don't worry, there are only that many operators that you can fit into a single squad that are each capable of destroying the wall of Terra by themselves 3 times over. After which, you might as well just spend your resources on any operator that tickles your fancy. And perhaps Hadiya might just be one of them. The spreadsheet featured in this video has its link available in the description. I will be seeing you around. Thanks for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and have a nice day.